I I recorded something and I haven't shared it, and I just re-watched it, and it was almost 20 minutes. And there was a moment when I was kind of thought experimenting, musing, worrying about one aspect of writing. I was talking about a problem. Problem isn't quite the right word. It's like for a storyteller, uh, you're retelling the creation of somebody else. But when it's your own story and your own fiction and your own plot, and it's completely manufactured, um, trying to relay it ends up not being about authentically relaying somebody else's story or putting a twist on and making it interesting, this kind of stuff. But it's about the reception by the audience. And in fact, this is one of the, I'm told, one of the, I guess, challenges in perspective that a creator has. It isn't about the perfection of the material, but it's about the reception by its audience. And it sounds really odd. It's open to gaping holes and problems in just the reasoning behind it, the structure of it. I mean, there's a lot of there are classes in universities that go through the gotcha moments in somebody's literature, and I don't think they understand what literature actually is. That it's about it's about the reception. It's not even necessarily about the audience as a like a demographic, for example. Yeah. Okay. So I've been thinking about all that kind of stuff, and the problem I have is I'm writing both with uh, fictional, uh, not exactly fictional ideas, but fictional circumstances. I mean, you know, wizards with fire and stuff like that. I can't draw from my experiences. I can build upon a lot of the tropes or a lot of the other suspensions of disbelief which exist out there. But when I craft a character and that character has attributes and I am crafting that story to be received a certain way, sometimes those qualities, those attributes of the character or the plot or the environment, that mood, that feeling, I want to craft it in a way that it doesn't have to be received pure or anything like that, but it has to be maybe endearing. It maybe has to be just this kind of alluring, attractive, engaging thing in an audience. And I can't actually know that. That's my problem, is I can't know that. Now I can pretend like I know myself, and I can write something. I mean, it's automatically interesting to me. I'm writing it, but I don't necessarily write it to be interesting to me in the same sense as I want it to be successful by being received well by others. And when it's the fact is, I'm already pretty distant from knowing myself. Like, don't play pretend like you know yourself. You really don't. Being a writer and challenging yourself to position yourself in the perspective of all the various bits of plot and all the different characters. Now that will help you see things a little bit better. And there are some problems of creating characters such that you end up having to submit to the perspective that is appropriate for that character in that situation for your plot. There's the train of thought going. Okay, so the problem is in creating something that will be received well, even if I know that I can't craft it authentically because I haven't lived it, and I don't know how it's going to go from what I write to them, how it's going to be received, and how an audience member will see themselves as part of a demographic, or how just how they as individuals will feel about it. And some of it is an absence of the understanding of the mechanics of a person's life. Taking it purely from a very cold perspective, you can, as an outsider, you can look at somebody else and you can listen to some of the stories in that person's life, and you can see them as being cold events that occurred, from which lessons are drawn, from which you can study and you can learn, and you can craft a story for that person with all those things in mind, and you can make it very engaging and very good. So you kind of understand at a very chilled, very high level place, and you can do excellent storytelling with that kind of stuff in mind. So I can say something like, well, what is it like telling the story of, a single father whose wife died and he's got 2 children and he's working 12-hour days. And I can pull some of that from myself. I can pull some of that from my life experience. I mean, I was a child once. I can pull some of that. But there's other aspects that I will be inventing. There's other aspects where I go and I look at the stories that are out there, or I look at other people, like, say, for example, I know my target audience, and I can pull out some of the way they'll think about that, and I'll write it in, and then it'll be received very well by them. But I don't know. Like, I just don't know. And in fact, I could take any story that I write, even if it's my own autobiography, and I will get it wrong. I will get it wrong from the pure standpoint at the author's side of things, and I will get it wrong communicating and having it received by somebody else. I just can't. There is no way for there to be any kind of assurance in purity in any of that, in correctness, in mood, in anything. So I can't actually comprehend how anything can be received well by a reader. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it turns out that I have a remarkable balance of characters I'm talking about my book, I suppose tentatively, but I'm going to call it Revisions of Magic. And in it, there are a number of characters, and they turn out to have, they're all unique. I like having unique characters, of course. I mean, you don't want to have like 6 characters and all kind of like clones of one another, and they all think and act the same, and they're all different from their different walks of life. That would be different ages, and they have fundamentally different backgrounds, different childhoods, different skills and interests, likes and dislikes, as I like to say. And there are some fundamental attributes that a lot of different kinds of audience members are going to be drawn to for their own unique reasons, the unique reasons of the reader. And so I'm struggling with, I will be creating characters that are so unlike myself, or my understanding of myself, that are in circumstances that I've never been in, that are for audience members that I am not in many of the demographics that they're in. So, I'm writing in English, so it'll be read by somebody in English, probably, but not necessarily. They might speak a second language. English might be their second language. So already, that's something fundamental, and already I'm losing a lot of people. There are a lot of things that I am, where I grew up, how I grew up, my class, which is in terms of economics. There's just so much life experience that's going to make me, really. And I can write with what I have, but I worry that I can't quite connect. And the big problem is how do I say it? We're not so different. We aren't. I exist in your past, and I'm not real. I'm some pixels on a screen and all this kind of stuff. So technically we have a huge divide, because I am several steps totally, utterly alien from your experience in life right now. But if I were alive and we were sitting across from one another and I were talking like this, monologuing like this at you in a coffee shop or something like that, then we'd have a lot in common. We'd have a lot in common in the human experience, and I can really, I can present emotion and experience, and I can connect very, very well. And of course, that's possible. I mean, look at the volume and the quality and the value we have in the literature that's out there already, and it connects to at least one person, even if it's just the author and a handful of people. So the problem I have is when other people play pretend like I'm supposed to actually be any better than I am at conveying any of that. The problem isn't so much that an individual reader will end up feeling almost like insulted that I'm trying, but that a crowd will get that opinion. And the individuals in the crowd will all play pretend in their own little ways that there even is a concept of sensitivity to somebody else's life experience. And that's a very specific concept. And the fact is, nobody can understand anybody's life experience. It can't be done. And people play pretend like they're part of a demographic that is aligned in terms of being able to more closely understand and empathize with the life experience of other, or at least that so shall we say, that facet of the shared life experience they have with other people that they think they're in a demographic with. I'm of the opinion that demographics aren't real, that humans are so very like one another that, I mean, come on, people that are not like one another fall in love and have children. Like seriously, you want me to believe that people are that different? We do get Romeo and Juliet. It's a thing. And that's just one aspect of how much we can truly see eye to eye. Now that gets into more complex, more socio-political, or whatever the hell. I shouldn't be swearing. Where was I? So the example is, if you've actually stayed with me this long, the example is, how would I write for or about women, for example? I've got a couple of characters that I'm working with. One I just kind of like. I like her. The problem with a lot of the characters I make is I have a backstory for everything in my head. And if I sit down and I think about it and I write about it, I'll get stuff. But the problem is you can't do that for every character. You can't have like 6 characters all fully fleshed out, all wonderful. A lot of books will just have really one. I don't. I'll have a handful, and I'll be going through them and kind of not quite giving them turns, but there's a reason why the plot demands that each one becomes more important than they used to be, or less important than they used to be. The perspective will make that an interesting and engaging thing to do, I think. Again, not written. And so I've got, for example, a couple of women in mind. And the thing is, we use tropes because they work. We use tropes not necessarily because they're biases, and not necessarily because they're because we're lazy, or they're easy, or they're it's so not in my head that I can't even think of the word. Like you have these, oh man, the word's going to come to me. Like you play pretend that a certain kind of driver is that way because they're in a demographic. What's the word? it's like you have these shortcuts to draw from, and these are handy packages for communicating complex ideas. So I might pull up. So to use the car example, I might pull up the image of like a desert dwelling mechanic with a dusty old car, and all of this stuff kind of comes to mind. But when I write that, am I just reusing stories? Am I having some sort of underlying sense of bigotry that's perpetuating a kind of, it's like a shortcut, and I'm just being too lazy about trying to convey these experiences, that perspective, these moods, those actions. So that ends up being an inevitability that a writer has. Is, well, as I said, I could be cold and I could intentionally bring those things, and it's kind of like reusing stories that are already out there. And even the notion of that loner who takes care of themselves, who's kind of poor because they don't really have the same concerns as city folk, for example, that's thousands of years old. And if I were to write that from my desert dwelling mechanic kind of perspective, one kind of innocent reader might think that is me like disparaging that by using these kind of shortcuts. But I mean, there are facts that are real out there in the real world right now. I could draw examples for different ways people act or think, or because it's the way they show themselves. It's what I see. But it is just as valid for me to reach into our mythology or our history, if you want to be a little bit closer, where I'm reusing stuff. But when I'm thinking about, say, women, well, first my audience is going to say, "What do you know? You're not even a woman." Like, oof. Like, I don't even know where to begin with that. Look, like I said, we can't even know one another as individuals or as ourselves. I totally get that people want to group a demographic up and want to play pretend like they have more in common with one another in that demographic than they do with others. They other everybody, and they say, well, nobody else can write because only we know us. But that's not actually true, because as it turns out, I have met a woman, more than one, more than two. I have not just met them, I've known them, I've fallen in love with them, I've lived with them, I've heard the stories from them about other women, I've read the literature written by women about women, and it just goes on, right? So at what point can I actually know a lot? I'll tell you something. It is possible for me as an outsider, let's just say that I'm an outsider, for an outsider to look inside another demographic and actually know more about that demographic than any handful of members of that demographic. And the reason is that if an outsider cares, they'll pay. You can't see my fingers. They'll pay attention. They'll listen, and they'll read, and they'll talk. They'll interview, and they'll look at the history, and it will just go on and on and on. And you can imagine that there are people out there who are perfectly capable and have the time, and they're driven to actually pursue the kind of overwhelming understanding of something else that is beyond members of a demographic, right? Okay, so why is it that a writer can be looked upon as being like somebody else who is so utterly alien to a demographic that they mustn't try to to write about that. Because it's not like a writer is speaking for a demographic. It's not like the writer is speaking over them or even being malicious about misrepresenting them such that whatever the hell. Because, well, I mean, facts are facts, and the demographic is real, and anybody who reads a book and goes, is when the demographic is right there saying and doing something like it. I don't see how it's possible for a writer to convey anything as long as they're being, I want to say the word honest, but that's probably not quite the way to convey it. It'll be misunderstood. So say something about a writer is being innocent and thorough, and they're just being good, capital G, good in their heart when they're writing about something. So when I were to have a character, wow, that was bad grammar, wasn't it? If I were to have a character, I guess when does really work for that. Anyhow, say for the characters that I have in mind right now, they are of an alien demographic that I am not supposed to know about. And that's going to be an interesting one to try to tell people. And I write on that person. I'm pulling on tropes and stories and all this kind of stuff. Can I ever do it justice? Will my audience actually let me be absent so that when they're reading, they're experiencing it and they're interpreting it in their own unique way without the author getting in the way? It's like, let me be behind the curtain. I don't mean anything malicious back there. I'm not controlling anything. I'm not even hiding back there. I'm not watching through. I'm not the Wizard of Oz that's back there that's doing stuff. It's not some game. It's just I don't need to be a participant in the experience of somebody reading. And I need it to be okay for a reader to just be themselves, to read. And I'll get everything wrong. It's an inevitability, but I mean, yeah, so why was that? Yeah, so my concern is if, I mean, I could be targeted for like demographic insensitivity, and I mean, I'm not just saying women. I have trees are going to be hurt. I have some really, really strong, and it's just the plot demands it. The world demands it. There are certain things that are out of my hands as a writer, and that's something that I'll speak on at another point, when the canon forces me as a writer. It's not my choice that character had to grow up under those circumstances. It's not my choice that character had to be heartbroken, because that's what happens. Now, you have two people that are in love. Something tragic happens to one of them. The other one is sad. It's not like it's my hating that other character or the demographic and making it sad as a statement of, it's like, I'm sorry, the plot went there, and I'm trying to be authentic about it. I'm not being insensitive. That happens. I mean, loss happens, and I want a reader to be okay with the fact that's kind of an honest situation, that I'm not manipulating the plot in a way to make a statement or in a way to railroad things such that I'm doing anything other than telling a certain story. And that's what's weird, is I'm pretty sure people aren't going to understand the very seed of where all this comes from and why it demands everything falls behind it. There is a sense in some artists that the art is only manifested through them, that they're not creating it, that somehow will is separate from action. And I feel like that about the very plot, even the style, even the characters. What happens and why to them is like a kind of inevitability that I can't control. I'm not using instinct to do all these things. It's not like some instinctive bigotry against forests that one gets, erodes in some way, it gets cut down or burns or there's a pestilence or something. It's not my innate dislike of plants or of it's maybe that is just what the plot demanded. I'm not using it as a handy tool to make some statement about forestry. I should say deforestation. Well, either works for whatever statement. It just has to happen. So, can I write about a demographic, and will I have to play the card if somebody comes forward, if let's say a crowd or a reviewer of some significant note comes forward and says, you can't have written this or have had that character because reasons, point at me and go, you're othered. Like, do I have to pull out credentials? Do I have to pull out a card of some sort to go, well, this is my experience. I'm drawing from my experience because of this and this and this. Can people just let it go? Because we can't audit every character, every plot line, every event, every author for all books. That's one of the problems of having so much content out there. It's as soon as you start auditing it like that, you have to be selective. And when you're selective, people that are selective like that end up having to constrain their efforts towards things, towards specific things for specific reasons. And you end up having ideological imbalance. And I don't want ideological imbalance to have me examined, or my book examined, or my characters examined, or the plot because of some misperception. Honestly, I have met women before, like for realsies. So why can't I write about a woman? Can I write about her troubles? Why not? Of course I'll get it wrong. I don't know everything. I don't know that very well, but I don't know me very well. So can it be okay?